what is going on in the world? Well, apparently, you don't really know why there's a war in Russia and the fact that America is fueling the fire. What up guys, I am Sa Ra Garvey. Please like, comment, share and subscribe as we get into this. Today we are going to be looking at a video from an army officer who was being questioned by a journalist. Now what I want you all to do is I want you all to watch and listen to this army officer and understand the arrogant and real world implications that he is spewing out and has absolutely no idea, or maybe he does, of what he's actually doing.
To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding. That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO. Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to move
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern cities.
Pretty sure that you...
Deflection, Your Honor, deflection. Listen, the journalist asks you, if NATO is moving or encroaching upon Russia's borders, right, is that what's happening? His response was, well, I'm sure it wasn't NATO who sent these types of rockets and these type of missiles. That's not what we're talking about. Don't you change the subject. That is not what we're talking about.
The Ukraine is not a member of NATO, so unless that's changed.
It's not changed, but I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is
if NATO is moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved.
NATO is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Watch. For 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So do you not understand it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. Right. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east. Correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
This guy is really bad at his job. Let's just analyze this. For 50 years, NATO has been anti-Russia, okay? And now, with the Ukraine crisis, NATO keeps moving closer and closer to Russia's borders. Now, I've got a neighbor, okay? And if I've had 50 years of hostility with this neighbor, and then all of a sudden, this neighbor decides to start parking his car on my drive, do you think I'm not gonna have something to say about that? Do you think that is gonna go down well? However, with this guy, he seems to think that everything is okay, and that to me screams of arrogance. It screams of imperialism and it screams of colonial mindset. Okay, the fact that you think that you can encroach on someone's borders and they should have absolutely no problem with it. Question, if Russia encroached on the USA's borders, would the USA be okay with this? Of course they wouldn't be okay. So why this guy is acting dumb in the face right now, as he doesn't know why Russia would have a problem with NATO encroaching upon their borders, is absolutely laughable.
Like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
Yeah, he is.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security
Which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member. Which is not a NATO.
I see to you
Other
on that
countries
point.
feel threatened.
Nothing
There
makes
you
me
go.
happier than when you actually see a really good reporter
Yeah.
that has the balls to do stuff like that and isn't silenced because they're scared about losing their job. I love things like that.
But that's a guy named Matt Lee, that journalist.
Good
guy named
on
Matt
you.
Lee. What are your thoughts when you see that?
No, our expansion, it's not a hostile move. No, I'm just going to knock your fence down and park my car on your drive and encroach upon your front doorstep. But listen, it's not a hostile move. Now, let me tell you something. It may not be a hostile move, but that is my territory. That drive is mine, okay? And everything around it is mine. You do not get to encroach upon my territory while telling me, oh, you know, it's not hostile, everything's fine. No, my friend, go back to where you were and leave my territory alone.
Well, it's obvious that they don't want you to know the real history. They don't want you to know that when Germany was allowed to reunify, the promise from NATO to Russia was that we won't expand NATO. And then, of course, it did. I think there's 13 or something more countries that they put into NATO. And now they wanted to put Ukraine into NATO or threaten to do that. That would be like if Russia got into a military alliance with Mexico and they wanted to start putting military bases in Mexico. We wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow it.
Now, a quick history lesson on what the man just said. What he actually said was right. There was a agreement that NATO would not expand. There have been a few people that have said there was agreement that NATO would not expand into Russian territory. However, what is going on now is that they are doing exactly what they said they wouldn't do. And then they're asking themselves, why does Putin have a problem with this? Well, you've just gone back on your word, and what Putin does is that he sees this as an aggressive tactic. So playing dumb does not work here.
And just like what happened in Cuba with the missile crisis in the 60s, we wouldn't allow stuff like that. But we're doing that, and people they don't want you to know that this NATO is not a defensive, it is offensive. This is a war that was started and provoked by NATO and the West. Zelensky ran on peace. He ran on bringing the country back together, right? The Russian speakers in the East, the Donbass. But he didn't do it. So why? Because he got threatened by NATO and the ultra-right, the Nazis in Ukraine. And so they threaten to kill. He knows he's a dead man if he does a peace deal with Russia. So that's why he won't. And when they had a peace deal in March, and that's when Boris Johnson from the UK flew there and said, hey, you don't do this. And he killed the peace deal. So Russia is the one that wants peace in this deal, and Ukraine and NATO do not.
Russia wants peace. It's not normally a narrative that you hear within the mainstream media. What we hear in the mainstream media is that Putin's bad, Russia's bad, and we should all try and fight them. However, when you get to break this down, you start to realize who the actual aggressor is. Newsflash: America and Europe are the aggressors in this situation. European nations for a very long time have been the aggressor when it comes to imperialism and when it comes to colonization. However, we have to be truthful in this situation, okay? Regardless of our patriotism towards our countries, we have to be truthful. No country does not have dirty hands, okay? And in this situation, the West are the aggressors. It is what it is, guys. Okay, from what I can see, from what I have analyzed, the West are the aggressors. Russia are the ones that are literally doing the same thing that the West would do if anybody tried to encroach upon their borders. Russia are doing the exact same thing that any of you and I would do if a neighbor tried to encroach up on my borders or on our borders. It's just normal. This story has been confused and discombobulated so much that the people within the West don't even know what is going on. Okay, and all they need to do is just show pictures of Putin and say he's bad, show pictures of Russia and say this is bad, show pictures of Zelensky and say he's the good guy, and then everybody just believes it, because people generally are not able to break down this information, and generally don't even care about this information. They just want to be told who's a bad person and who the good person is. And that is something that we need to get out of. We need to start analyzing information, using our critical thinking brains, and actually breaking stuff down. This is Sa Ra Garvey. Thank you all for tuning in. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And we will continue to ask what is going on in the world, as long as this world is getting crazier and more weird. I'm going to catch you on the flip side.